Hello, 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 everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back. We're going to be reading the ninth house and the 10th house as we move along in our houses. And I have to break up 9 through 12 because they're longer. So still reading Sacred Contracts, still written by Carolyn Myss. So again, we're going to read the 9th house and the 10th house in this video. And then in the last one, which are the last two for this chapter, chapter 7, we'll read the 11th and 12th house. So let's go ahead and get started. Not sure why these last four are a bit longer. I tried making a video reading all of them, but I wasn't even into the I think it was the 11th house, and we were already over the 25-minute mark, I think. So yeah, just to keep it from getting too terribly long. All right. So the 9th house is connected to our spirituality, and which makes sense. We're also connected to the 7th chakra, which is the crown chakra. The 9th house, which corresponds to Sagittarius, the 3rd fire sign, rules spirituality, religion, travel, and wisdom. The energy of Sagittarius is associated with boldness and independence, qualities that enhance the quests you are drawn to pursue. The element of Sagittarius fire fuels inspiration, devotion, and the passion to realize an intimate relationship with the divine. While the fire sign Leo rules the 5th house, While the fire sign Leo that rules the 5th house is strongly linked to dramatic personality characteristics and theatrics, Sagittarius fire lifts a person's spirit into transcendent pathways, in keeping with the symbolism of the Centaur directing his arrow into the cosmos, or Cantar. Shadow aspects inherent in this house relate to the challenge of managing your spiritual ego, often characterized by the archetype known as the Messianic complex. The 9th and 10th houses sit on top of the chart and represent the guiding forces that help us to remember, however unconsciously, that life is a spiritual journey and that our role is to act continually on our highest potential. So I don't know if you remember or if you saw the video where I showed you the actual wheel, and if you want, you can actually download probably just a PDF of the wheel with so we have the 9th and the 10th houses right at the top of the wheel. 9 and 10 are right at the top. And you could probably, like I said, download a copy of the wheel if you literally want to write in your archetypes in each one. The spiritual awakening, referred to as a dark night of the soul, resonates powerfully with the energetic profile of the 9th house. Our contemporary culture has largely shifted from the group practice of religion to the deeply intimate search for an individual spiritual path. While this is a positive movement in our evolution, many people today are attempting to live by the more exacting inner standards once reserved for monastics, but without the privileged environment that once allowed monastics to focus solely on their spiritual practices. So that's a lot of trying to get in living this type of a life in a regular everyday setting. The shadow side of this migration of formerly cloistered spiritual practices into the mainstream is the potential for spiritual crisis or even madness. Going deep into the self to attempt to make contact with the divine traditionally requires the guidance of someone spiritually equipped to hold your hand through the points of passage into the soul, namely a spiritual director, a guru, an abbot, or a mother superior. I don't even think I would know where to find a mother superior this day and age, or even an abbot. During the process of spiritual introspection, you may descend into profound stages of loneliness and emptiness, detach from emotions and everyday senses, and even ironically develop a feeling of meaninglessness. I'm sorry, I think these are bothering. If they're bothering you, I'm trying to keep them up here. I can't just slip them off. They kind of hurt. Yet many people now find themselves in a detached emotional state of mind, while struggling at the same time to maintain life on the outside, going to work and paying the mortgage. Frequently, the burden of living in two such opposing dimensions can virtually disable people with depression. But how do you distinguish between conventional psychological or clinical depression and spiritual crisis, whose symptoms can seem similar? I bet that's what a lot of people are going through right now with all of the awakenings that are sort of happening all over the world and seeing an uptick in depression and anxiety. To begin with, all depression arises out of a feeling of disempowerment. The balance of power in your life shifts and you feel that you are no longer calling the shots. Clinical depression generally arises from external or physical events. It may have its roots in a chemical imbalance or a traumatic life change. Anything from a divorce or the loss of a loved one to being diagnosed with a serious illness. Such depression often results in an inability to function effectively and needs to be treated by an appropriate mental health professional. By contrast, spiritual depression is more likely to be triggered by an absorption in metaphysical issues than by material concerns. You may feel that you have reached a dead end, that you've been abandoned by God, or have no hope of ever experiencing divine union. Spiritual crises can sometimes be caused by a traumatic change, such as a serious illness or divorce. If it leads you to question the meaning and value of your life rather than focus entirely on your material misfortune. Sorry, I had to pause for a second and take off my bracelets because they were hitting my dresser and hurting and annoying me. Okay. Clearly, the distinction between a clinical depression and a spiritual crisis can sometimes be a fine line. Another way of recognizing it is to observe the way you respond to a crisis. If you react by asking yourself how you will ever find someone to replace your divorced spouse or lost loved one, how you can get out of a job that's killing you, or how you can find enough money to live, more than likely your depression is primarily psychological. If you respond specifically to the feeling of having been rendered powerless by being consumed with anger, resentment, or blame directed towards others, you are most likely not spiritually depressed. When in doubt, of course, you should always consult your physician or a mental health professional. If, however, you are asking questions about the meaning of life or about why God seems so distant from you, then most likely you're in a spiritual crisis and you may need to seek out a spiritual director rather than a psychotherapist. I feel like that's where I was for many years, but I didn't recognize it as spiritual. But when I look back, for as long as I can remember, my question was always there has to be, or my thought was always there has to be more than this. I feel like there's something more than this. And when I say more than this, I'm not talking about my physical life. Okay, I have a home, I have a happy life, I have a good job that I like, I have a healthy family, I'm healthy, I have everything I need and so much of what I want and more. It has nothing to do with my physical aspect of my life. And now when I look back, of course, hindsight's 2020, I can see that it was never anything about the psychological and it was a spiritual. Only when I had this awakening that I've had have I actually opened up more and I no longer deal with depression. I feel like that was a dark night of the soul that lasted a very long time for me. And I feel lucky to have gotten out of. If you determine that your depression is largely spiritual, one solution may be to surrender all your worldly fears and concerns to the divine, to let go and let God, as the saying goes. You can make a simple declaration to the divine that your own attempts to direct your spiritual life have come up empty, and that you need divine assistance. Surrendering to divine guidance is different from giving up all your worldly goods as you would do if you were to take the traditional vow of poverty. Yet realizing that you live under the protective field of a sacred contract, which provides you with all that your life requires for the evolution of your spirit, can allow you to end the struggle between your personal will and that of the divine. The act of surrender is a statement that says, I allow the divine to make my investments according to a wisdom greater than my own. Marissa's life illustrated precisely this kind of experience. An intellectual professional who had the archetype of the scholar on her ninth house, Marissa was able to examine any idea as closely as if it were a microbe on a glass slide. She was well read in virtually every academic field from history to botany, and she was blessed with a keen memory. Marissa pursued God in the same manner in which she researched any subject, with the intention of conquering it. Whether she read mysticism or history, her ultimate intention was to find a path to God as a reward for her studiousness and dedication. To fulfill her sacred contract and divine potential, her scholar would have to lead the way. Had she had her victim archetype in the ninth house, for example, then her journey into the divine might have begun through experiences that left her feeling disempowered, vulnerable, and in need of spiritual strength. If the child were in that house, she might have related to God as a protective paternal figure, or parental, which in some cases can be a helpful way of seeing the divine. And from what I understand, those who are most in touch with that childlike divinity really are closer to that divine connection to God. So that could have been her best chance, but that's just not where her houses fell, and there's nothing wrong with that. Marissa eventually hit the wall beyond which intellect cannot go. The mind cannot pin down the power of the spirit, which answers to divine, not human logic and laws. When asked about historical perspectives of God, she was fluent. But when asked about the experience of the divine, she was baffled. Eventually, her bafflement shifted to frustration and then to depression, as she realized that her brain power alone was not enough to produce the states of ecstasy about which she had read so much. Marissa decided to go on a retreat, to pound at the chapel door, so to speak. In effect, she was allowed to enter the monastery, but she did not meet God as she had hoped. When I met Marissa at a workshop, she was confused, weary, and almost despairing. Drawing up Marissa's chart, the first house I looked at for a clue into her spirit was her ninth. When I found the scholar there, I began to understand her problem. "No wonder your spirit is half insane," I said. "It's fasting, given the mental diet you've been feeding it." We spoke about the spiritual significance of the scholar and its role in pulling her deeper and deeper into the rational mind, only to show her again and again that her soul is not rational. The soul's field of study is the nature of God, which does not yield to logical examination. Marissa had reached a choice point. She had to humble her scholar and immediately cease reading about the divine. Her books would not give her the answers she was looking for. Marissa had no idea what I was talking about, which was another good sign. Already, her mind was shutting off. I suggested that she allow herself to enter her madness, to feel this frustration, and to wait for the time when meeting God on the road to reason no longer mattered. When you can reach that point, God will be there, I told her, which was the identical instruction I had been given years before by a nun and mentor whom I dearly loved. A little over a year later, I received a letter from Marissa telling me that she had followed my instructions. "I have learned during these past many months that I am not the disciplined person I thought I was," she wrote. "I am controlling and terrified of being controlled by others. I wanted my experience to follow my rules. When I would meet people, I introduced myself, mind first. I wanted to overwhelm them with my brilliance and that way dominate every group. I decided somewhere during these past months never to do that again. When I'm with people now, I listen instead of talk. I genuinely want to get to know them, and I share with them my feelings as well as my thoughts. I feel that I'm becoming softer inside, and in this softness, I have made ready a place for God. Already I am more content. I am keeping a diary on the conversations I have, and my scholar is learning to study the many ways people appreciate being alive. In short, I'm doing okay." That sounds like a beautiful way to come to terms with something like that in your life. I love Marissa's story because she fought surrender with all the power she had and lost and then won. She did not have to give up her profession, move her home, or become poor and celibate. She simply had to reevaluate the control the scholar had over the manner in which she related to life and to God. Okay, and now the 10th house, which is connected to our highest potential and is also connected to the 5th and 7th chakras. So that would be the throat and the crown. Yeah. The 10th house is ruled by Capricorn, the third earth sign of the astrological chart. The energy of this house works on your highest potential. It pushes you to be all that you can in your physical world and your spiritual life. What is the highest potential of your compassionate self or your generosity? What is your highest potential when it comes to empowering another? What is the highest potential you can strive for with your talent? Your highest potential is what your sacred contract is prompting you to recognize and realize, because this requires that you make choices regarding your spiritual destiny. The house corresponds to the energies of both the 5th and 7th chakras. The archetype that resides in this house is your entryway into deciphering the choices open to you and the quality of your motivations. The shadow side of your highest potential is self-sabotage or doubt or lack of faith. Fear of failure, as well as fear of success and responsibility, characterizes the challenges inherent in this house. These are basically fears of your own powers and empowerment and the changes they require you to make in your life. You will need to face whether you would deliberately block your highest potential from emerging and why. You will also be challenged to retain humility as you become more empowered. Pursuing your highest potential is the most difficult marathon. With each upgrade, whether personal or professional, something or someone will arise to test the depth and solidity of your inner growth. On the earthly plane, this encounter might present itself as a confrontation between you and another person who doesn't want you to change. Or you may find yourself in a relationship with someone of whom you've become jealous, which will test your own potential to support another's talents and gifts. Or you may be given an opportunity to pursue a goal of inner transformation, only to discover that such opportunities always require that you leave a part of your life behind, that you make a necessary sacrifice. Some people find sacrifice and change too high a price to pay and do not pursue or fulfill their potential. The archetype in your 10th house is the indicator of how your unconscious organizes your thoughts when you are faced with choices that can lead you into fulfilling your potential. Remember that although all of your archetypal companions provide influence in every aspect of your life, the archetype that resides in this house represents the symbolic language that you want to use to begin deciphering all that your highest potential holds. Foley's life holds an extraordinary contract. Foley has an identical twin brother named Dennis, and like many twins, they were inseparable until they reached their college years. Dennis had assumed that they would both go into business and management. Foley, however, fearing his brother's objections, had kept hidden from Dennis his own desire to study botany and to move to Costa Rica for a few years. Soon after they began college, Dennis became aware that Foley had a different future in mind and became withdrawn. He felt completely betrayed and said that Foley should have kept him informed all along about his growing interest in a different future. Dennis viewed Foley's decision to move to Central America as abandonment. Although Foley anticipated that Dennis would be upset, he was surprised by the severity of his brother's reaction. Dennis changed schools in their sophomore year. In time, the pressure exerted on Foley by his parents and his broken relationship with his brother compelled him to forsake his ambition. I met Foley about 3 years after he sacrificed his dream. By then, he had completed a degree in accounting. He was working as a waiter and hoping to continue studies in computer science, but his heart wasn't in anything he was doing. Until Foley admitted that he had compromised his dreams, he would never feel fulfilled. At first glance, Foley's problem may appear to be a third house concern over siblings and communication. But Foley's primary issue was that he was negotiating his own calling in life, a 10th house issue. He was not following his inner voice to pursue his highest potential. Dennis may have been the immediate reason, but the core issue was Foley's own anguish over losing his highest potential. In many situations, as in Foley's, different concerns may overlap. You may need to peel away several levels of issues and several houses before you get to the central one. Foley had the hero archetype in his 10th house. When I asked him why he had chosen the hero as one of his 12 archetypes, he said that he associated endurance, dedication, and loyalty with the hero. He had consciously worked on developing these qualities all of his life, particularly in regard to helping and looking out for his twin. He added, however, that he always felt that he would be directed on a mission that would require him to separate from his twin. I knew it since I was a kid, he confided, because I have been aware for a long time that I was carrying my brother's psyche on my shoulders. I was always trying to make sure he was happy and safe. I was the one always working out his problems and helping him to make the grade. And I knew that I would have to part with him if only to give that same level of attention to myself. I wanted to know what it felt like to put me first and who I would be if I were totally free to make any choice I wanted to without having to check in with my other half. I asked Foley to describe the difference between how he saw his hero in the business arena and how he saw the hero as a botanist striving to maintain the health of endangered nature life. The phrasing of the question alone almost crushed him. "There's just no comparison," he said. "I'll never contribute to life by adding numbers as much as I would working in the field." We discussed what prevented him from returning to his original course. By now, his twin should have been able to take care of himself, and I asked him to name 3 compromises that his brother had made in his life to ensure that Foley would be happier. He couldn't even offer one. When I asked Foley to describe the health of his hero archetype, he said that he felt that the hero had become a weak and defeated force in his spirit, and that it embarrassed him to remember that he had walked away from his own inner guidance. I don't believe I have any courage left, and maybe I never had any in the first place. If I did, I think I would have gone ahead and moved to Central America. Foley was living in the shadow of his hero, and his way out was to pull himself out of his own misery by finally deciding that his life meant enough to him to go ahead and live it. Adjusting his physical life to suit the demands of that commitment would be his initiatory hero's journey, and it would give him a sample of his highest potential. The next test, choosing to break free of his tribe and to pursue one of the tasks of his spirit, would represent the next stage of the hero's journey. And I feel like this is something that happens to people quite frequently. It doesn't have to be a twin. It can be your parents. It could be, that you have X amount of doctors in your family or lawyers or whatever, and you're sort of expected to follow in those footsteps, even if it's something you don't want to do. It's really not an option. From as little as you can remember, this is what you're told you're going to do. This is the school you're going to go to, and this is the kind of life that you're going to have. That happens a lot, especially with certain cultures. And you find yourself living for other people, for their happiness and for what they want you to do. And that's just simply it's not possible to have a fully happy and fulfilled life doing things to please others, because you're the only one who can live your life. No one else can live it for you. After visualizing this break to freedom, Foley felt renewed. His breathing changed and his energy temporarily shed its depression. He began to glimpse that his brother and parents were not the real reason why he had failed to take hold of his highest potential. Foley had the hermit archetype in his 3rd house. Siblings and communication, expressing his need to separate from the strong family psyche that held so much influence over him. Unlike his brother or other family members, Foley needed his own space to express his life. Expression being a 3rd house characteristic. With or without his brothers clinging to him, he would have to seek an independent path. As in all contracts, his family was actually a gift for him. Many families serve out their roles as obstacles, then become powerful supporters. Foley's was the embodiment of a collective challenge that would refine his inner hero, forcing it to be determined and independent. What a wonderful way to look at that aspect, or to look at the way that that family sort of helped him. That's a very unique way. I like how the author spins it like that. It's an obstacle that kind of forces you to move through that obstacle and hopefully do what it is you want to do. One of the manifestations of the shadow aspect of the third house is in the way we communicate. Not just with others, but with ourselves, our psyches, our spirits and intuition, and with the very essence of our life. When Foley did not follow the voice and yearning of his own spirit and did not communicate his desires to his brother and his family, he betrayed his inner voice and alienated his spirit. Now he would have to call on his hero to recapture his soul. All right. So that is the 9th and 10th house, and we will be reading the 11th and 12th, as I said in the last video, because they are just, they're about as long as these two. And then we have just a little paragraph that kind of rounds out the chapter, and then we'll be moving on to chapter 8. There are 11 chapters in this book, so we are almost all finished. But I have to say, this is the most videos that I've made for any book, and I've read some pretty long and more intricate and more difficult to read books for sure, but this one is definitely my longest so far. All right. Well, thank you all so very much for joining me. Until I see you again, as always, please take care of yourself. Please take care of those around you. Stay safe. Stay in gratitude. I love you all very much, and I'll see you for the last 2 houses in this chapter. Take care until next time.